empathizing and reaching out. Clearly, that has worked over here. So today we thought, well, this is called a conversation cafe. So it's not really a place for us to sort of impose any ideas or impose any kind of narrative on the situation. The point of today is to have a conversation. So if everyone's sort of agreeable, I thought the way we can do it is that we have some panelists with us. I'll introduce them. We have Ryan Lepage. Ryan did his undergraduate degree and his master's degree at Ontario Tech, or UOIT as it was called then. I've had him as a fourth-year student, and I've had him as one of my graduate students. And Ryan has vested interest in the ideas of identity and identity politics. We have Samantha Brown with us. She's an undergraduate student, also the president of the BIPOC Club at UOIT. She has given me some great ideas about the things that we're going to talk about today. So a lot of the themes that I'm going to talk about today are actually some of her brainchild and some of her ideas, along with her colleague. And last but not least, my colleague, Dr. Stephen Hayle. Stephen is a teaching faculty here at the Department of Criminology. Many of you guys have probably had him, so I feel like he requires, vice president of BIPOC and president of the OTHS Club. My apologies, Samantha. You do so many things on this campus that I feel like I need a little booklet to figure out what it is. Everywhere I go, Sam is sitting there sort of representing the student body. So, as I was saying, I feel like Dr. Hayle doesn't require any introduction, so I'm not going to give any because I feel like you guys know him very well. But as you know, Dr. Hayle is one of our teaching faculties and has graciously agreed to share his experiences with us. This is probably going to be the most I'm going to talk during this meeting. I sort of want the floor to be open first to our panelists, and secondly to all the people who are here. So if you feel like there's something that we're talking about and you have an experience you want to share, or if you have an idea you want to share, by all means, please share it. Karen has graciously agreed to kind of monitor the chat. So if you type it into the chat, maybe we can bring it up at various points. Or if you just want to raise your hand, or if you just want to kind of interrupt and open up your mic, go for it. I feel like we can all just be friends. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction as to what it is we're going to talk about. Today's event is one of the events that we have on campus to sort of discuss the issue of being Black in Eurocentric society. More specifically, we are very much interested in discussing the experience of being Black in academia, and more specifically here at UOIT. So I have some themes that I have written down here that I'm going to ask panelists to talk about, but hopefully we'll kind of just start from there and we can explore things a little bit more. So I guess the first thing that sort of, when we think about being in academia and sort of being a student or being a professor, are the courses that are offered, materials that are on the agenda. And as sort of most students know, what's on the agenda really determines sort of the discourse that exists. So I sort of want to kind of start from Sam and work my way around. I kind of want to know, I mean, on campus, we do sort of, especially here at this department, we talk a lot about kind of inclusivity in the classroom. But I want to know, as both a student leader and as a student, do you feel as though materials that are covered in the class are inclusive in a real sense?
Honestly, no. Short answer, no. I feel like we do a really good job, or we are doing a good job in getting better of including Indigenous peoples. I feel like we include Indigenous people. There's a lot of Latin perspectives, but I think that's where the inclusion stops a little bit. I haven't had a reading that's centered around anywhere that where there are Black people, honestly, unless I find it myself when I have a project and, you know, you can insert whatever you want. There's definitely freedom to do that, but as provided materials or any required materials, definitely not. It's pretty Eurocentric for the most part. And even when it is Indigenous perspectives, it's a Eurocentric perspective on why we shouldn't be Eurocentric when discussing Indigenous perspectives. So, yeah.
And why do you think it's important to have that voice, that Black voice kind of in the classroom?
I think for representation purposes and rhetoric and misinformation as well. It's great to have all perspectives, but there's always, I know people say there's always two sides to the story, but I feel like there's always three. There's the person who was the colonizer, and then the person who, like the people who were colonized, and then the people who stood there and witnessed that. And I think that a lot of times, you know, there's two perspectives that end up getting left out. And it's unfortunate because for people who don't experience that, they're not getting that information, and it kind of just gets left out from the conversation. They don't even think to include that sometimes. So, and I definitely have friends as well where it comes up in conversations and they were just like, I've never thought to think like that because that's not their world experience. So yeah. Also, I just wanted to mention David is also one of our panelists.
My apologies, David. I didn't see you on the list on the side. I thought maybe you're not joining us, so I didn't want to embarrass, but I'll sort of pass the baton on to David as well. We've been sort of talking about, Sam sort of raised a very interesting point to me, sort of this idea of a third voice and at the same time a Black voice. And it's interesting because that's an interesting way to look at it, that it's not just the content is not just important, but also the voice that's communicating that content is also important. How do you, as a sort of a Black student, feel kind of in a classroom where do you feel that your voice is there a place for a Black voice in a classroom? And do you feel comfortable kind of taking that place?
Hi, can you hear me right now? Perfect. Yeah. So I think there obviously should be a place for a Black voice because, one, if we're starting off, there should be the emphasis on seeing how your background, be it ethnically or socially, will play out in the workplace. So if, let's say, you're coming from a minority group, what is the situation currently like for people from that minority group in the industry that you're trying to get into? And what are some of those struggles you will have to face going afterwards? Because definitely it's not just a theory alone that you have to go and apply when you graduate. You also have to go through such things as office politics. You have to work your way through leadership roles and how you can really represent those people that are coming up behind you. So I think that definitely is an avenue that, like Sam said, hasn't been very strongly explored. But at least I'm glad that we're starting off this conversation to start see ways that we can start having those conversations so that we not just have graduates, we have aware graduates as well.
That's a very interesting point that you raised, that, you know, having sort of, if I can put, you know, the common lexicon on it, woke graduates sort of coming out of the university. What does that mean to you? What are some of the things that, if you had an option to stand in front of a classroom and sort of set the agenda in the classroom, right? The way we started this conversation was about, it's not only just important to have the ability to move within an agenda, but also who sets the agenda. So if you had a chance to set the agenda, what would be some of the things that you would like the university to think about while they're setting they're thinking about through the bigger picture of the type of courses that they are offering and type of ideas that are exploring?
Yeah, it all starts right from the basics, for sure. Like when one is starting off in your first year, for example, I'm in my third year of mechatronics engineering, just to give context. If right from the onset, when I started having discussions about career opportunities or learning about engineering ethics, for example, and the conversation about how that applies to someone like me specifically, doesn't come up, then it sort of leaves me in this limbo where everything is very generalized and everything is put under this perspective. So, for example, let me just draw a parallel to add deeper meaning to what I just said. Let's say I'm an international student, which I actually am. An international student migrating from a very different country and trying to get or penetrate into the Canadian workforce, their experience is going to be very different, especially when it comes to getting co-ops and internships and getting post-grad jobs or post-grad opportunities. To then generalize it in such a way that you just go get your internship, go get your grad job. You might already have these connections here and there, where that in fact is very far from the reality that such a person may have zero connections. They may have had no previous work experience. They may even struggle to know how to communicate with an everyday Canadian because they didn't grow up in this environment. It's not fair on such a person to then give them a very generalized perspective. So, of course, there are many approaches one could take with this, but it starts from the people who are implementing the teaching material, the teachers and the professors themselves. If they were trained on how to apply the general principles, but for various different kinds of people, then that's the beginning of where we can now start going forward with this.
That's very interesting. I kind of want to come back to this idea of the intersection between sort of one's race and other sort of social determinants, whether being a migrant student, an international student, or being a female, or being a part of an LGBT community, or any of those things. But you said something that kind of is a nice segment into me asking a question from Ryan about post-university, postgraduate. Sort of what happens after we finish with our courses. And as I said in my introduction, Ryan not only kind of did his undergrad here with us, but he did his master's degree here with us as well. And since he was one of my students in both undergrad and in his graduate courses, I know that Ryan spent a lot of time kind of thinking about the idea of identity and race identity. So I sort of want to pass it on to Ryan to ask, but first of all, sort of some of the things that David said about post-grad life, after university life. How do you feel as sort of a person who has sort of explored his own racial identity? Do you feel like your education prepared you for the world? And I also want to know, sort of as a graduate student, did you feel like there was a difference in representation between what sort of David and Sam have been talking about in undergraduate? Do you feel like the same problems kind of exist in graduate level as well?
So first I'll touch on like the graduate versus undergrad. I would say that it's definitely a problem that I would say is more prevalent in undergrad. I think about my own undergrad career, and I imagine it's got to be even harder being in engineering, because with social science courses, we tend to look more at identity and intersectionality perspectives. But I would say that the courses where I learned the most about identity were actually optional courses. They weren't mandatory courses. For example, I don't know if it's still being offered today, but I took critical race theory with Dr. Critchlow. And I think that was just by the name of the course, right, very significant in terms of exploring identity and how those things relate. How does it intersect with income? How does it intersect with educational outcomes, with work opportunities? And in connection with that, I'd say, yeah, at the graduate level, there's definitely a lot more space to actually explore that. You have a lot more freedom in terms of what you pursue. And then with regards to the post looking for jobs, my perspective, my situation is a little unique, because I also had the issue of the pandemic coming down and really impacting job opportunities across the board. But what I would say is, especially given that applications, you see the application before you see the face, and when you see the name Ryan Lepage, you're not really going to necessarily be picturing a black man. So I definitely did have, I can think of actually one specific example. I won't name the company that I interviewed with, but when I got onto the video call, there was almost like a bit of a surprise. They're like, oh, how are you, Ryan? But for the most part, I'd say that having done the graduate school as well, I felt that I was sufficiently prepared. I'm actually working in the financial field now, and I was able to just swing what skills you learned, right? Learning to relearn to write, all those things, it's all transferable. So it's kind of selling yourself to a degree.
And how does it feel sort of being Black and looking for a job? do you feel your race when you're looking for a job?
I do once it gets past the application stage. As I said, right on paper, I have a very like Eurocentric name, Ryan John Lepage. It's a European last name, French. So I think for the most part, I have a level of privilege that way with respect to my name, because when someone looks at my application, they're not necessarily picturing a black person. They might be picturing a white person. And it's only once we get to the actual interview, face to face, actually on the video call, that they get that realization.
And sort of, I kind of want to ask a similar question from Dr. Hayle here. I know sort of people looking at you, they don't sort of realize that you've probably been in academia longer than most students have been in school in general, but you and I have spent quite a bit of time in academia. I kind of want to know, did you sort of, do you see a difference in the way race is experienced in academia since sort of early 2000s when we started kind of our academic career to today? And sort of along that line, do you see a difference in the experiences of race between kind of more traditional universities, larger universities, and a university like UOIT, which is a smaller university, a tighter knit community? You're muted, Stephen.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, gosh, I think back to, I started university. I started my undergrad in 2003. So it's been a while, and experiencing, the idea of what it's like, experiencing and being black in academia, it really didn't hit me until I think it was about third or fourth year university, and I was at the University of Waterloo. So to take the one part of your class, so University of Waterloo, which some of you are probably familiar with, is a big school. It's not as big as U of T necessarily or UBC, but it's a large campus. Most of my classes were 150, 200 students, and it dawned on me in a class in third year, fourth year, for the first time. It was really strange just looking around and just realizing how alone I felt, and how in a class the size of 150, 200, and then looking at the faculty and just starting to notice the campus community and the differences in terms of the makeup of the campus community, the faculty, and then the students. So how have things changed? I mean, certainly when I think of some of the things that the people have talked about, I totally agree. I remember what it was like in studying criminology in the early days, and maybe getting, and I don't know to what extent things have changed that much, but I can remember what it might be like to take an entire course and spend maybe 20 minutes or one class, if you were lucky, talking about the Indigenous experience, and that was it. Or getting a textbook where the last chapter of the textbook was about it was about indigeneity, or the last class, and it was rushed for half an hour, was about race or ethnicity and crime. And so I think that certainly I feel as though things have changed there, where it doesn't feel anymore necessarily like it's an add-on or that it's a discussion. But as people have said, I still think that there's a lot that we need to work on. What hasn't changed, and Samantha made a great point about it, is that there's still, I think we're still struggling to make sure that we're privileging and prioritizing voices and the experiences of these diverse groups of BIPOC scholars and activists, and bringing their voices into the classroom. I think in that way things haven't changed, and the the loneliness that I remember feeling as an undergraduate student. I think that things have changed. I think that things have improved, but I still felt that at the University of Toronto as a grad student as well. So that's fast forwarding 5 years later, it was still similar there as well. Now thinking about the experience here, UIT is a much smaller school, is a much smaller campus community. This is the first time that I've participated in an event such as this. Being in criminology and talking about things like decolonization, and the importance of bringing that into the classroom, for first year students, and from the very beginning, those are where I think I'm certainly starting to feel like things are changing, and so I think that things have changed, but at the same time, I still feel like we're struggling to really prioritize and ensure that voices are being heard, both in the classroom, and not just in the classroom and in their courses, but also outside of the classroom. And this is great, but certainly it's also something that can be challenging when we're doing it virtually as well.
No, that's sort of, it has there are a few things that you said that I kind of want to explore, but one of the important things that have come up that both you and Samantha kind of raised specifically was the idea of not all racialized people being put in one box. That, okay, fine, we're going to talk about Indigenous people, and we're going to talk about sort of, brown people and Black people and all these people all under the term racialized. And I sort of like the sort of one of the clubs that Samantha's involved in, the BIPOC club. And the BIPOC is meant to sort of, the BI part of it is meant to kind of point out that Black and Indigenous people have a special kind of experience that maybe other people of color are missing. Talking more specifically about kind of being Black and being in academia, especially in Canada, do you feel like we as Canadians sort of, there is this sort of idea that us as Canadians, we don't really take our Black population as sort of, we don't talk about it at least as much as Americans do, although sort of racial relations might be better, but we don't talk about the Black population as much as Americans do. The Indigenous population is being included. But what are some of the solutions to it? As Samantha pointed out, as David pointed out, is the solution to kind of have a course called, for example, race theory or critical race theory? Or is the solution something more holistic, something more inclusive into courses? How do you, I guess, think about being Black? Either Stephen or Samantha.
I could do it. I think that it's not about it just being inclusive, or that it just including one group. I think it's, or just like excluding it to one group. I think it's important to have the inclusion, but there also needs to be room for, this class is to discuss Black people. This class is to discuss Asian, like the Asian hate crimes that are going on and spiking right now. This class is for this as well, and then having a race theory class. And also, not the fact that the class exists, I think what's really important is what Ryan brought up about how the classes are optional. My experience isn't optional on Black 365. For students to get to choose to learn about that, and it's not a part of their curriculum, is sometimes extremely frustrating because it just perpetuates the stereotypes and the systemic issues further. I have to learn white history all the time. I've been learning white history since the first day of school. I was lucky that I went to, and lucky is not even the right word, that I went to a school where I talked about Indigenous history. We talked about Black history in elementary school. The second we had social studies classes, but I know that's not the experience for other people. And it's definitely not the experience in post-secondary either. So I think it would be important to implement it everywhere where it's inclusive, and just not having it as one unit, because that's not what it is. I remember when we were having the meeting about this, and we were talking about like, would I like to discuss as a student leader, or would I like to discuss as myself? It's the the hats don't come off. Regardless of what I discuss with myself, people do see me as a student leader. And if I say something or I do something and it's not up to the standards of what the club or the society or the OTSU is up to or what they hold themselves to, that's definitely noted. And it's noted times 2 because I'm a woman, and it's noted times 2 because I'm a Black woman. So it needs to, it definitely needs to be everywhere and included in all the units, because the Eurocentric nature is included everywhere. So why shouldn't our experiences be included everywhere as well, especially in the workplace as well? Because like Ryan, my name, when you look at it, you don't think of a Black woman. It's pretty Eurocentric for the most part. It's not French, but it's not like what people would expect. And I definitely do get a privilege on that because I don't have to write my name at the bottom of the resume for my application to be seen, right? So.
And sort of that's, you raised a very important point here, that you're not just Black, but you're a Black woman. And I want to know sort of if you feel like that the experience that you share, because both you and Stephen used the exact same word of sort of feeling alone, being alone. I want to know sort of how do you, when it comes to mentorship, which is a very important part of this discussion, right? This is what David's talking about graduating. This is sort of what Ryan's talking about when he says, he feels his race when he's going to go into a work environment. So he has to have the type of mentors who have taught him how to act in a way that he can sort of conduct himself. How do you feel as a Black woman sort of in this process? Do you feel that your gender is a mitigating factor in the process, or do you think that it is a further hindrance to your inclusion into classrooms?
Both, definitely both. I think sometimes it's used as a token. Look, like we have a Black woman here, so what we're doing must be okay. Or look, we have a Black woman here, what's up with that? It honestly depends on the context, I think. And then there's the aspect of, there's the glass ceiling for just as female, and then there's the glass ceiling for a Black female. And the obstacles that, even how David was talking about the politics of getting to places, I have to work that much harder. And I'm sure they can relate to that too. You have to work that much harder to get over, any person of color can talk about that, to be seen even close to the same level, not even on the same level. And that's not discussed. And that's also not something a lot of, I think, non-people of color think about, because that's not their experience. They don't have to think about that. And it's definitely frustrating because when they don't have to think about that, then it implicitly gets replicated. And I think that sometimes it's helpful to be a Black woman in some aspects, because I think there are a lot of things that I have privilege that I don't experience because I'm not a Black man. And I can't imagine what it's like to be a Black man in academia, because there are so many stereotypes surrounding Black men, and I can't speak on those, but I'm sure the other participants can. And there's a lot of things that I experience that they don't experience either. So yeah, definitely both.
And that's something interesting, right? Because oftentimes when we're talking about being Black, especially sort of in criminology, I guess, in our head, we have a Black male being harassed by police, or a Black male kind of being in a gang, or any of those things. So when we talk about that Black experience, I often find that we think in our head Black men, we don't really think Black women. And that is, in this sort of discussion of inclusivity, that is a problem. How about in the sort of, how do you feel about finding mentors around campus? Do you feel as though the representation that you see makes you comfortable enough to approach people and ask for mentorship, or have people who intuitively grasp you?
Sorry, is that for me or is that for all the panelists?
No, you, Samantha. Then I'm going to go to David and ask him about his last name, because the other two have pointed out that their last names give them a privilege.
I think that I've had one Black professor that was a woman, and she wasn't a permanent professor. So that also has an impact on it as well. I believe she's the Dean for Equity and Diversity at U of T, but she comes back and then leaves occasionally. So that's also an impacting factor. And we relate because we're from the same places. It's definitely nice to see a face that you can relate to, because when, like what Stephen was saying, when I look around the classroom, I'm usually maybe one of three Black people and usually the only Black woman in the class. So I think it's definitely hard to find mentors. Till this point, I think I've had maybe 2 teachers that are Black women and maybe 2 teachers that are Black men. So it's definitely hard to find a mentor that I can directly relate to, which definitely impacts where I try to improve myself on things that I don't know or that I don't realize or haven't experienced. So I think that's why leadership is really important to me, and it's always been really important to me in high school, because I've had other little Black girls come up to me, and even the ones that I babysit, and go, oh, well, now I know I can do that. And I think that's why leadership is important to me, because there's no, like what you were talking about, like we picture a Black man, and that's the connotation of words in criminology. You think Black men before they even say it, and then what does that have to say about the ideology in our society? So when I hear like another little Black girl come up to me, or another little girl of color go, well, I can do that now too, or you did that, how did you do that? I think that's the only reason why I think like I continue to look for leadership, because if I can provide some sort of form of representation for somebody else, it's that much more important, because I didn't see Michelle Obama till I was 13. So yeah, I think that's really important as well.
And I really, truly wish Emma could make it today, because Emma could, I'm sure, speak on this as well. Unfortunately, last minute, she had a conflict. But David, I kind of want to come to you. The other sort of 2 of your colleagues have pointed out that they see it as a privilege that they have names that are very Eurocentric names. Now, sort of looking at your last name, it's definitely not a Eurocentric last name. How do you sort of contend with, or how do you deal with the fact that even on, for example, Ryan pointed out that on paper, he doesn't have to be Black. But how do you feel about sort of being Black before even being seen, being Black kind of on paper as well?
Yes, definitely. I realized that when the other panelists mentioned that too, and it kind of reminded me as to how I have an African last name, which of course in the traditional Canadian setting is very unfamiliar. Constantly, of course, I have to teach people how to pronounce my last name, or I just let them pronounce it however that's comfortable with them, just to avoid that discussion. But definitely it plays a huge role in terms of what I call the pre-filter, or how do you say the first impression. It kind of doesn't even give me much of a chance to make an impression, because my name already does it for me before I even get there. So I guess in a number of cases too, even before I go for an interview or I put it on my resume, for example, or even in just an ordinary conversation, sometimes, and I'm not even really proud of this sometimes, I've kind of always felt that slight need that I needed to show that I can relate to you as a Canadian. That, for example, I went to a Canadian high school. I did my high school here in Canada, or maybe I can speak in a similar accent to a Canadian, for example, or I know the kind of things that you refer to and whatnot, just to show that I can relate with you, because people ordinarily or naturally like familiarity, which is why I love the points the other panelists mentioned about mentorship and seeing people that are very similar to you in positions of influence, because now it inspires a whole generation of people coming up behind them. And of course, breaking that barrier at first is often very difficult. It requires help from probably both sides, the people who are holding that position of power to be enlightened and really open up the space for people to break into those spaces. And of course, the people who wish to break into those spaces to also be inspired and empowered to do the same thing too, which is why I love what Sam is doing, for example, with the BIPOC Club, where she's creating that opportunity so that generations coming up after are then seeing multiple people looking similar to them and can then take that leap of faith and don't feel like, for lack of a better word, I'm sure you probably heard this term called whitewash before. Don't feel like they need to be whitewashed before they can be accepted in places of work or places of social communities, for example.
Well, this brings me to sort of another one of the themes that I wanted to talk about, which was sort of being comfortable being Black. You know, And that's something that Sam said to me when we were talking about sort of her experiences. We've had a few meetings before this. And one of the things that Sam said, and one of the things that Emma raised especially, was that, for example, Emma, she's not here right now, but I'll share the experience. She was pointing out how it took her until her fourth year university to become comfortable with being Black in a sort of academic environment. So I kind of want to ask you, David, what does that mean? Have you felt comfortable being Black in this environment? Has this been something you've thought about before? And what are some of the sort of hurdles in reaching that goal?
Yes, I think it is a fantastic question because it then takes off what I say, a weight off your shoulders where you don't need to, like how Sam said that being a Black woman in her field, she has to almost put in extra effort to get the same kind of opportunities as other people would. It takes that weight off your shoulders where you don't feel like you need to put in twice the amount of effort to, of course, get the same results as other people should. And it's kind of similar to why I and a couple of other individuals started pushing to actually set up an NSB chapter at Ontario Tech. Now, if you don't know, NSB is called the National Society of Black Engineers. It was started in the USA sometime around 1970, I believe, and it's very prominent in the US. It's still very much upcoming in Canada. And it was because I noticed that it was a lot of, let me say, dispersed Black people in that engineering community where each person was individually running their unique race. And we, even amongst ourselves, weren't even having deep conversations about what the opportunities for Black people are in our field of engineering. And of course, unity brings about power. There's strength in numbers, which is why I feel that when such people start to unite, that's when they can start feeling comfortable because they know that, well, if I'm going to be attacked or face friction or face resistance because I'm trying to be comfortable in my own skin, I know I have a whole army of people by my side around me as well who are also doing the same thing. So even if you're not naturally a very confident person as an individual, just the strength of the group alone can really aid in your confidence and putting yourself out there and being comfortable. So that's why, in summary, I believe that there is strength in numbers. And when that community starts to develop in groups, that comfortability factor will start to improve a whole lot.
You would have made a great sociology student, David. I think you might have missed your calling. Because so I kind of want to pass this on to, although being a great engineer, I'm sure it's a great calling as well. But because these are the type of things we talk about, right? This sort of idea that your identity doesn't exist outside of a group, that the only way to become comfortable with who you are is to have people around you who accept you for who you are, you know? And I kind of want to pass this on to Ryan, because as a graduate student, sort of mentorship means something completely different to you than it would mean to an undergrad. In undergrad, it's nice to have a mentor, but in graduate school, you almost have to have one in order to be able to finish it. How did you think about sort of the type of people who you picked as mentors to sort of help you through the process? And what role did sort of did race play in that discussion?
Well, I'd say my two main mentors were yourself, for those who didn't hear. Amir was one of my supervisors for my thesis, and then Dr. Ashia Zaidi as well. And I'd say when I was an undergrad, I knew that I wanted to do graduate school, so I kind of was always looking for that person who could potentially be that mentor. And then in second year, I was with Dr. Ashia Zaidi, who is a woman of color herself. And in talking with her, we actually started speaking about identity, and she was like, oh, like, you know, you could do some great work in the future. And I kind of stuck with her. And then in my fourth year class with policy development with Amir, it was like a similar situation. It's a space where we definitely could speak about identity and speak about various topics openly without issue. And like quickly identified as like someone who I think would be very helpful to move forward with. But touching on what David said as well about like finding your space in terms of being Black, I'd say there was a period when I was in like between first and second year where there was almost just this giant sense of like frustration, where I almost felt like, just with the negative connotations of like blackness in academia, the negative connotations around black people in general, it's almost like I had to like defend my blackness to a degree. I don't know if that's the right wording, and maybe some of you guys can share similar insights or perspectives. And there was like a very big amount of like frustration, and then like I ended up getting over that hump, and it was in part through aligning myself with other students or people of color, finding those mentors. But yeah, there was definitely that sense of like having to almost like defend my ethnicity in a sense, especially being black in academics.
And I want you to sort of expand on that, sort of defending being black. Like, can you give us an example, or can you give us a feeling? I know sometimes these things are more of a feeling than like a concrete example that one can get.
Well, I can think of one example. It was actually after a class I'm trying to remember what specific class. I guess it doesn't really matter, but it was a class, and we had been talking about like criminal statistics, and as for those who aren't aware, right, like black people, minorities tend to be more likely to be arrested, face longer charges, longer sentences, so on and so forth, all throughout the criminal justice system. And I basically was getting into an argument with some other people in the class during like what like was the discussion, where it turned to an argument of like, I was making the argument that there's other factors at play here, right? The system of intersectionality, like poverty, I'd argue, is a bigger driver of crime than race. And instead, I was hearing back, it's like, no, race is the driver of that crime. And it's like you're almost getting into an argument where I have to almost like defend my own race as to why those incidents could be occurring.
That's interesting. I sort of want to get Stephen involved in this discussion because, first of all, I want to sort of ask you about the other end of this. We've been talking about mentorship quite a bit. But there's also this discussion that, there's this black tax on black sort of faculty members that, you have to take on the black students. You have to take on anyone who wants to talk about race. Anytime you have a Black History Month, you have to show up to it. How do you feel kind of from the other side of the mentorship table? Do you feel as though your race sort of pigeonholes you in this process of mentorship? And as a sort of on the side question, how do you think, what are some of the things that you think about when you are mentoring a black student sort of through their schooling?
It's a good question. Absolutely. Thinking about pigeonholing and maybe to think about what's said. I think that the pigeonholing experience is something that for me at least, in many ways began a lot earlier than as a faculty member in graduate school. You get pretty early on a sense of you get a lot of people sort of asking, but before they even know much about your background or in terms of what research you've done. So, or are you interested in studying gangs? I had a lot of people assuming sort of early on that I was interested in studying studying gangs, or you're interested in racial profiling, and absolutely I was. But then surprises when, because a lot of my research, I look at drug policy, I look at politics and supervised consumption facilities, and get people scratching their heads often, being like, oh, but I thought your dissertation was on race, or I thought that you mainly look at racial profiling, or would you be interested in doing this project? And so I know as I'm kind of talking from the perspective of a graduate student, but even then starting to feel that sense of what one would think is appropriate, or what one would say is what you would want to be doing. And so now taking that my the experience as a faculty member, I hear it whether here or other places that I've taught, I don't know if I would say that I've felt necessarily like expectations that there's certain things that I would teach, or certain kind of service requirements necessarily, but on the of mentoring, it's still one of those things that I'm trying to map my way through in terms of figuring out, if there were students that I'd be interested in taking on, how that process would even work. How would those students be recommended to me, or how would I seek out? It's it's a bit of a tough thing. What would I hope in? And I'm pretty early on. This is only my third year, so I've had a chance to mentor and work with some students. But what I would hope that mentoring could involve is, first of all, things like one of the things that Samantha mentioned and that others have mentioned, this idea of working with a student who's maybe writing a thesis, maybe a master's thesis, or maybe an undergraduate thesis, or maybe a PhD dissertation. How can I encourage or maybe help a student that I'm working with really truly bring their voice forward, especially in a kind of writing and research where it's drilled into us that when you write a paper that you shouldn't use the word I. I think we try our best to say that no, there's nothing wrong with using the word I, but it goes a lot deeper than that as well. Even if you're using the word I, that research is supposed to be objective, that research is supposed to be value neutral, that when you're writing a paper that you shouldn't be bringing in your own perspective, but when, as I think some of you have said, that's what's missing. That even if you get a course where it's not a textbook, but let's say you're reading readings, you're not hearing the voice, or you're not experiencing the voice and the experiences of those through what you're reading. And so, if there's one thing that I would like to be able to help with is helping people find a way to to be able to bring their voice and their personal experience to say that yes, this is research, yes, this is academia, but that doesn't mean that you should have to silence your voice or silence your own perspectives to bring your passion and bring your life, your experience, your lived background, so that a lot of the things that people have been talking about, that we can express it in our writing, that we can express it in our. So that's one thing that I'd like to be able to mentor. And another thing is also, a lot of people have talked about is navigating. There's so much to the experience of being an undergraduate student or a graduate student that I would have loved to have had a mentor. I would have loved to have had somebody as an undergrad. And you said it, Amir, this is more for grad studies, but even as an undergraduate, to have someone to help you during those periods during your BA where you're feeling that loneliness or feeling that sense of not seeing or not knowing where to look to, if you are seeking someone like a mentor, someone to help you understand that, for example, there's been so many times where, and I think Samantha said something similar, where you might meet a faculty member, you might meet for example, meet a Black faculty member only to find out that they're not a full-time faculty member. You might see them there from time to time, but they're a sessional faculty, or the experiences of being pigeonholed, or how to deal with that experience if you feel like you're experiencing that as an undergrad student or in graduate school or beyond, helping you prepare for that. Those are the kinds of things that I think a mentor can really help with. I mean, my mentors and our mentors are always great with helping us with our writing process, with research, with all those aspects of our education and of our curriculum. But there's the other side of the curriculum. There's the interpersonal side. I think a mentor can be so helpful, especially if it's a mentor who can empathize and share in those experiences. So mentorship is I think it's deep, but the challenge I find, or I think the challenge is how do you facilitate that mentorship? How do you facilitate those connections, especially in an environment where, as some people have said, you often walk into an environment, big school or small school, feeling that like there aren't many people there.
And sort of coming back to this idea of having people around you, Stephen has rightly pointed out that there's more to university than just what happens in a classroom. There's more to university than just academia. And there's more to research than just sort of, this is what I read in a paper, that one's personal experiences should speak loudly out of papers that they're writing and presentations they're doing. Samantha, David, and Ryan, you all have been student leaders here on campus. David and Samantha right now. Ryan was the past president of the Student Association, the Downtown Campus Student Association, right? Am I getting this right, Ryan?
The whole thing.
The whole thing. Sorry. He was a president of the whole thing. I remember kind of seeing his pictures everywhere I turned, holding sweaters for us to purchase. So as student leaders, you guys are the other side of this mentorship, right? That, yes, no question about it, that there is and there needs to continue to be improvements in the availabilities of mentors, both in terms of race, gender, kind of personal experiences and personal interests. But where do you see the role of extracurricular activities in your own life in exploring your sort of identities, whatever they are, and in the sort of success that you have had at academia? Samantha, I can start with you and move my way to David and then go to Ryan. You guys are in a row for me.
Oh, that works out. Okay. I'll just start with what I'm in, so then they give some context. So I'm president of the Ontario Tech Humanity Society, and then I'm vice president of the BIPOC Club, and I'm an international orientation leader, a peer leader, an ambassador, and then I'm the FSH board of directors on the OTSU for next year, and then I work for the Student Life Department in the Registrar's Office for the university. I think it's important. I think it's really important, just for the fact that, you know, it's really hard to find mentors. Experience, I think, for me at least, has filled that gap a little bit. I can, if I can't have that mentor, I can have that experience. I'll figure it out on my own, kind of thing. How Ryan mentioned, like, making space for himself or trying to find that space. I kind of go for making space, in the sense of finding it. I find if I keep looking for it, it's not going to be anywhere. I'm just going to make the space where I want to be. So that's what I do. I think it's really important, especially since, you know, the BIPOC Club didn't exist this year. And if the president, she's not here right now, but if Miriam didn't think of that, or she didn't come to me, or we didn't, you know, just enforce that, we just thought of it and it never came to fruition, then we wouldn't have it. And there would be no aspect of that, there'd still be that gap. And there definitely still are gaps. But I think that, you know, we have a Nigerian Student Association, we have a Caribbean Student Association, there's the Tamil Student Association. There's a lot of things that, even if you don't have that form of, you know, you don't want it to be academic, because there are academic clubs like the OTHS, there are STEM clubs. If you want that to be a part of it as well, you can. You kind of get to decide your own experience. I think it's really important, honestly. You learn more than what's in the classroom, because university, I find most of what I've learned has been outside of the classroom. And even if I did learn something in the classroom, the application of it is not there, it's outwards. And I get to process more information the further I go out. So definitely join clubs if you're first year or any year.
How about you, David? I mean, have you found that extracurricular activities have helped you in that process of sort of the process that you were talking about, kind of feeling comfortable on campus?
Yes, I completely agree with Samantha. Joining clubs would definitely be a good way to, of course, explore other areas of school life that you naturally may have not even thought about going into. And I think there are probably even two different clubs that initially I never actually planned on pushing for, but just because I didn't really see, let's say, much representation in that area, I decided to almost take the responsibility upon myself. So of course, Samantha and I are both international student leaders. That was great. We work with international students. I'm also currently serving as a senior peer leader too. And initially I had no intention for going with that role, because I just wanted to continue with my education, study my engineering, go out and work and do whatever. But I noticed that I didn't really see that many people in that leadership position that had such a strong influence with the first year students, Black people in that position. So I said, okay, why don't I take that responsibility upon myself, that at least if I can just play my part, I'm not looking to individually alone change the whole school spectrum, of course, but I can play my own little part in doing that and hopefully encourage somebody else to do the same and onwards. And even like the National Society of Black Engineers that I said we were planning to start up. Naturally, I could have just said that's something overwhelming, that I don't even want to start going through that whole process. Let me just continue, go do my capstone. Third year of engineering is already tough enough on its own. Why would I want to think about doing that? But when individually each person starts to take the eyes off themselves and start looking at the bigger community and see how they can contribute, so that together, if everyone is contributing, we have an overall greater result, then I think that's when it starts to result in people wanting to join all these clubs, even though initially, just by their own personal goals and intentions, may have not been what they would have been inclined to do. But just for the sake of having somebody that other people in their background, from their background, can look up to, just for the sake of the community, for the sake of representation, more people can start to take that responsibility upon themselves and go out and join these clubs.
Very well said. And sort of this sort of sense of kind of camaraderie through extracurricular activity, and sort of taking that responsibility as a Black person to say, hey, you know what, if I don't feel included, here are these clubs that could help me feel included. So that sort of mentorship, the other side of the mentorship, the student mentorship, call it collegial mentorship. Ryan, you've been sort of in a place that, first of all, you had to run for an office to which you had to get elected. And I want to know, did you feel like you were able to mentor other Black student leaders, number one, in this process? And number two, how did your race kind of play any role in the decisions that you made? Being in that role, or did you feel as though you needed to defend your race while you're in that role? That's
getting involved with like student mentorship and like student leadership, I think was a way for me to kind of carve a space for myself, as Samantha had been saying. I would actually credit a lot of, like, if you had asked me like in first year, hey Ryan, will you be president of the student association? I would have said no, there's no way I'd ever even run. Like, I would never even think of applying. And it's through getting involved in like the clubs and societies, as they said. Like, I was just like a first year volunteer for some of the society events, but it's what got me started. And I'd credit previous student leaders as to how I became a student leader myself. And I always enjoyed being that mentor. So like I was involved in like the I Begin every summer. So when the first year students come in, I loved being a TA, being able to provide like on the academic side of things that help in mentorship, you know, with office hours and such. But overall, I'd say that, yeah, like I would say I use student leadership to like carve a space in that sense.
Thanks a lot. And we have a couple of minutes. I want to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to raise, or is there a theme that we have not explored that you guys think we should explore, either of the speakers or of people in the audience?
Can I share a comment in the chat?
Sure, Karen.
It was actually way back, but I didn't want to interrupt your talk. But it was in response to Stephen's, what you had said, Stephen, and it was from Aaliyah. We need to place more value on the actual human experience as opposed to just the quantitative side of things. I completely agree, Dr. Hayle. Just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Karen.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank Karen and Amy for having organized this event. I would like to thank the BIPOC Club and Samantha for having helped us sort of put this whole thing together. Thanks to David and Ryan and Stephen for agreeing to join in. And thanks for everyone for coming by and making this into a great conversation. Have a wonderful day, guys.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, everyone, for sharing as well.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Amir. This was excellent. Thanks, Amir. It was great. And I just put something in the chat about, I'm glad we recorded it. We can show it to others. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, it was
Thanks,
great.
everybody who participated. Thanks.
Bye, guys.
All right. Thanks again. Thanks again, Amir. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to.